We're good? Cool.
You're
So, I'm Stuart Criddle. Nice to meet you all. This is Hugh Davis. We're from PwC. We're going to talk about electric vehicle charging systems and cars and security things generally. The aim of this talk really is to make you as excited as we are about fiddling with ecosystems and vehicles. We do a lot of this. It's really good fun. What we're not going to do is drop a whole lot of O-days and then get ourselves fired, I'm afraid, because that would make our lords and masters very sad with us. Hopefully, we're going to give you enough information and skills and knowledge and excitement to go find your own O-days, because there are so many of them to do. So Hugh's going to talk through the electric vehicle charging part first, and then I'll move on to the connected vehicle part second. So without further ado, because the clock's against us...
We've done the instructions, and those are our faces.
Those are our faces.
Those are our faces. So,
our best faces.
this is our hardware lab, which is, I don't know, like, you can probably see it out that window, just around the corner by the castle. So, when I joined PwC, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago now, built an electronics lab to be able to tear apart vehicle head units and other pieces of hardware, I suppose. At that point, electric vehicle charging wasn't really on our radar. But we've got the ability to do a variety of sort of hardware things, I suppose. So do a lot of hardware teardowns, understand what components are on a board. It's quite boring for electric vehicle chargers, that, because they're all the same. We do chip-off analysis, so we'll pull the storage chips off and dump them and then sort of read out the contents of them. Usually nothing's ever encrypted, so that saves us a bit of time. Once we've got that chip off, we've got a couple of very apt reverse engineers, but they're not me. I can use strings, and that's about the extent of my skill. We have got a bunch of this little automotive Ethernet adapter. Finding increasingly now that vehicle head units require some sort of CAN or automotive Ethernet or something to keep them sort of to wake them up, keep them alive. It's got a bunch of that stuff as well. We've just invested in a big RF chamber room thing so that we can do cellular assessment. So that has been driven quite a lot by the electric vehicle chargers. We're finding increasingly, particularly with the home chargers, that they have got cellular modems in them for communication with sort of the cloud services that they rely on. Some of them have got Wi-Fi, some haven't. Some have got Bluetooth, but I think we're increasingly seeing cellular. So we've got some cellular base station kit as well to be able to spin up cellular networks in a box. But because none of us want to go to prison, we've got to sit in a stuffy room. We've also got the ability to simulate OT and industrial IoT networks. That's not hugely relevant to either of bits in this topic. So, EVSE. Someone said apparently earlier on, didn't know what it meant. So, electric vehicle supply equipment. Just an electric vehicle charger. That's all it is. Broadly, there are 2 types. There's the types that you get in your house, or attached to the side of a house, and there are the bigger ones that you tend to see sort of in motorway service stations and I don't know, outside the roads. There's some around Cardiff starting to spring up now. Very brief history of it. So in the early days, the home chargers tended to just be a tiny Arduino that all it had to do was generate a little PWM signal to talk to the car and tell it how much power there was on offer. And it had to be able to read a voltage back from the car that told it what the car was about to do or what it was currently doing. They didn't tend to have any external comms. They were relatively cheap. I mean, it was a relative thing. But with some recent legislation, the government has binned all of those now. You have to all electric vehicle chargers sold now in the UK as of June last year have to be able to be connected to the internet. But that is usually up to the end user. Some, as I say, come with cellular. You just automatically connect. You've got no choice. Some of them tend to have Ethernet or Wi-Fi that you can choose not to connect, should you be paranoid. And then as it gets into the sort of the public chargers, the interconnectivity between the charger and all of the things it relies on, which I'll come on to later, becomes really very complex. So it's a very rapidly moving market, and we're probably from the beginning of that. And obviously, electric vehicles have been around for a very long time, but the chargers probably the majority of the technology development and movement in the market has happened in the last sort of 5 or 10 years. So there's a lot of new companies popping up to deliver electric vehicle charging services and sell chargers on the market that are not taking security as seriously as maybe they should be, which is why this is a lot of good fun, really, because it's quite easy and you can do some quite cool stuff. So there's a couple of news stories. Probably you've seen these. First one wasn't very exciting in terms of a sort of hacking thing. Someone just replaced the content on a CDN that was displaying ads on a loop. They just replaced the ads with some porn. But obviously got in the news and was a bit embarrassing for the Isle of Wight council who owned the chargers. This one was a little bit more interesting. So there was a little bit of anti-government slandering going on the screens, but they also disabled all of the chargers on that network as well. So it was a little bit more than just the sort of changing the pictures on the screen. So I've sort of touched on this a little bit. So there are more and more regulatory requirements coming in. As I said, last June, a requirement came in that all of these chargers needed to be connected to the internet. In December, which is 6 months later, there were some mandatory security requirements added, just to give the manufacturers a little bit of time to catch up. They're not very exciting. They are, don't put default passwords in, and sort of, it's all a bit noddy. So again, there's still quite a lot of fun to be had here. The government are talking about bringing in mandatory availability requirements. So it's quite a common thing that you rock up to an electric vehicle charger and it's not working, or the payment terminal's broken, or for some reason it's just off, or it physically isn't there, or there's all sorts of stuff where they're not quite as reliable as turning up to a petrol station and filling it with diesel.
Anyone here drive an EV? That's a better sample. Yeah, we both do, so we both feel this pain firsthand. So
yeah,
the availability requirements are great.
Yes, so I think you will find it as hilarious as anyone else that I think the target is now 99% uptime for EV chargers, which presumably what will happen is they're just going to disable and turn off and remove a bunch of them, because there are quite a lot of old crap ones that just, I think, are not going to be able to manage that level of availability. Obviously there's some GDPR requirements, but actually, as I'll come on to in a minute, the data that's transferred between an EV charger and sort of the supporting cloud systems isn't particularly interesting from a privacy perspective, usually. And then also there's a couple of other things. So recently, sort of in the last couple of years, the government have mandated that if you turn up to a fast DC charger, you should be able to pay for your chargers using a contactless card. So again, most of these now that are popping up have got, well, they have to have a contactless payment terminal in them, but it doesn't have to work. I'm sure there'll be others, but as yet, nothing hugely exciting from this perspective. So, chargers themselves, as I said, there's broadly two types, and I sort of stereotype them into home and motorway, but really the major distinguishment is whether they just give you straight AC power off the grid, or they have got a massive transformer inside them and turn it to DC for the battery in the car. So all cars will have the battery in an electric car is DC. So if you want to charge it up, you can either give it a small amount of power, which the car will have a little AC DC converter in it and can charge the battery, but those tend not to be huge, and sort of some cars are down to 7 kilowatts, others are up to about 22. But then the DC chargers, again, it just tends to be how fat the cable is inside the car that goes to the battery to determine how fast you can charge, but usually it's sort of up to between sort of 10 and 20 times as much power you can transfer. So the communications between these aren't mandatory, so it is mandatory that a DC fast charger has to use more complicated communications with the vehicle than the AC ones do, but the AC ones are welcome to use it if they want, but generally they don't because it's more expensive. But again, I'll come on to that in a minute. And then once you sort of get past all the power electronics, it's just another IoT device. There's been quite a lot of public news stories and things about sort of pen test partners have sort of been going at these for a couple of years now. There are a lot of them that are just Raspberry Pis. We're seeing quite a lot now of the newer ones for home usage tend to be even dumber than that, so they'll be ESP32s. The big DC fast chargers, because the communication requirements tend to have a bit more of an interesting OS. Obviously, the DC fast chargers tend to also have a user interface, although they don't have to. And then there's sort of the authentication requirements, which can either be, if it's a home charger, there aren't any usually. But if it's an AC charger in a car park, so say a Pod Point one in a Tesco car park, usually they've got a little modem inside them and you authenticate the charge through an app, and there's no other way of sort of tapping a card or anything like that. And then all that data from your charge is usually fed up to some sort of cloud platform so that you can control the app control the charge from an app, whether it's on your house or whether it's somebody else's. So the communication protocols. The Open Charge Point Protocol is the brokering protocol that's used between the charger and a management system. The management system can either be a little box that's sat on the network next to the chargers, or it can be almost always now it's a cloud service. So, sort of a typical OCPP use case is that you'll turn up to a charger, you'll beep your RFID card, the charger will use OCPP to send the RFID token. It's always only the UID, they don't do anything more complicated than that, to the management server. The management server will decide whether or not that RFID is in its database of allowed users, and then we'll tell the charger whether or not to start the charge. And then once the charge starts, the charger will report back metering data and usage and the amount of time the card being plugged in and all that stuff, so that the user can be billed ultimately, I suppose. It also gives sort of heartbeats and things, so that the server knows that the charger is online. And the server using OCPP is able to do a couple of sort of interesting things from a denial of service perspective. So it can tell a charger that it's offline if it wants to. It can tell a charger to put itself into maintenance mode, and again, won't allow people to start charges. It can also tell a charger that it's reserved for a future charge, so not, again, to allow anyone to rock up and plug into it, because it just needs to wait. It can also stop charges. So if, for example, the use case would be that you've got like an allocated amount of credit for your charge, if you hit that cap, then the server can tell the charger to cut off your charge and come back to a not as charged car as you thought you had. So the communication protocols that we're saying about, obviously the low-level communication is just a PWM, pulse width modulation square wave that the duty cycle of the wave determines how much power there is on offer from the charger. I don't really even know if that's communication. It's very, very basic. The much more interesting one is on the high-power chargers. They use a protocol GreenFi, which is based on the home plug protocol, which is, I don't know, some people say you can still buy them. The plugs that you can plug in around your house and sort of stick an Ethernet cable in one end, and it uses the wiring of your house to make another Ethernet port pop out somewhere on the other side of your house. So it's the same as that. It was originally designed for smart home, smart metering type stuff, so that your smart meter could talk to your washing machine, but that's not really it in the UK, but it has sort of really taken off. Well, it's mandatory for EV charging. What's interesting is that as the home plug protocol there's been more and more demand for people to be able to get gig speeds across their network. It's become more and more complex, whereas GreenFi, I think, has only got a transmission speed of like 10 megs, but it's very, very highly robust, so you can actually pick up GreenFi signals quite a long way away from the source. And I've did a little bit of investigation a little while ago, and one of my neighbours was able to plug in a GreenFi plug in there, not a GreenFi plug, a home plug in their house, and pair it to mine. So back up through my meter box and back down again, and a GreenFi is even more robust than that. So quite an interesting sort of potential snooping on the communications there. Usually there is encryption required, but it's not always implemented. So that's quite an interesting area for playing with. I've not had as much time to play with that as I would have liked, but it's an interesting thing. CAN bus, so one of the EV big DC charge connectors that are available have got CAN bus directly into the EV charge socket. They're quite uncommon in the UK now, so they tend to only. So I think it's only the Nissan Leaf and maybe one or two other cars that are using those still. But generally, they are connected to CAN bus of the vehicle, so all of your normal CAN bus hacking tricks apply here. Equally, the GreenFi is actually just an Ethernet connection into the vehicle, and sort of in the one or two vehicles that I've had to play with and looked for wiring diagrams, they tend not to be connected further into the vehicle. But as more and more vehicle manufacturers are moving towards automotive Ethernet for their sort of communications buses within the car to replace CAN bus, it'd be interesting to see how far that Ethernet bus can penetrate into the vehicle. So sort of these higher level communications are required so that the charger can monitor the state of the battery and just make sure that the car's not going to explode. It's nothing very exciting, but actually it gets a fair amount of data from the vehicle. So it can pull unique identifiers, obviously a lot of stuff about the health of the battery, sometimes usually make and model, sometimes even colour of the vehicle, I think. So I said that not very much data tends to be transferred, so OCPP has got a very rigid set of things that can be transferred, and really the only unique identifier is your RFID token or your account number. But some of these chargers, because maybe they're a little bit shonky, will crash and have incidents and will keep error logs, and the charger sometimes just uploads a big lump of data about all of the error log that's happened, which can include a bunch of private data about the vehicle that maybe even the charge point operator wasn't sure was there. So it's quite an interesting, again, some of the data that's being transferred, sometimes not even the manufacturers of the chargers are necessarily aware of where that's going. This was something that was sent to me by a client yesterday. Not hugely exciting, but basically just someone talking about having a bunch of EV chargers sat next to each other on a network, and they had charge point server sat at the end, and if you plug a laptop into that same EV charge network and try to authenticate a charge using the unique identifier of the charger whilst an existing charging session is happening with the legitimate charger, this particular server de-auth the original charge and stop the vehicle from charging. Obviously, you've got to get onto the network, so it's not hugely exciting. But again, sort of demonstrates how this is all a bit of a new thing and a bit of a Wild West. So you can try pretty dumb things and have sort of some success. And it's probably worth noting that obviously, whilst it's all a bit of a game and a bit of fun, actually, if you can stop someone's car charging and they're expecting to come back to a charged car so they can get home somewhere, you could really ruin someone's day here, or potentially worse if maybe it's an ambulance or a police car that you've de-auth the charge for rather than someone who's just gone for a shop in Tesco. So this is a rough sort of idea of all the things that a high power DC charger tends to be connected to. So you've got the charger itself in the middle here, you've got some other EV chargers sat next to it on the adjacent network. As I say, you've got the payment terminal that's usually locked inside these. For the majority of the ones that we've seen, because the charge point manufacturer doesn't want to get into all of the joys of PCI DSS, they just buy an off-the-shelf payment terminal, stick it in, connect it to the modem, and they don't really see any of the data, but they get the sort of payment information back in the same way as you would if you were a shop with a payment terminal on your desk. Most of these tend to have RFID readers on the front of them for you to have sort of a membership card or something to be able to start charges. As I said earlier, all of the ones that I've ever looked at only use the unique identifier of the RFID tag. And almost always that is what is used as your unique identifier to authenticate all of your charging sessions. So if you can clone somebody's RFID card, you can charge your car on their account forevermore. And there seems to be, again, fairly little checking of impossible travel and things like that goes on with charge point operators. Obviously, the electric vehicle communicates. We've discussed that. And then you've got engineering interfaces. So some of these are more interesting than others. Some of them you'll find is just a sort of a UART connection on the front of it. A couple that we reviewed a little while ago had an Ethernet interface and hosted their own little web server for you to interact with the charger, which in that case presented a couple of quite fun vulnerabilities, which are on the next slide, so I'll come off those in a minute. And then you've got your cellular modem uplink and then all of the stuff that's sort of in the cloud then. So all of these could be, well, I suppose the charge management and software update could be coming from the same place, or they could be separate. The back-end management is the owner and the operator of these. Usually there's a phone number plastered on front of them. If you can't get your charge to start because the car terminal's not working or whatever, you can usually phone them up and they can authenticate the charge without you having to pay for it. So they've usually got that access in. There is the potential, but again, I've never seen it, that the charger can communicate with the grid to be told by the grid to sort of calm down its charging because it's about to hit a high load period or to sort of quickly shed a little bit of load. And that was the main motivation for bringing the legislation earlier last year, was so that local distribution network operators could disable people's cars charging sort of 5 o'clock, turn your kettle on, so you stop your car charging whilst you're doing that at the same time that it is. And then obviously all of that sort of ties into mobile apps. So sort of a brief whistle-stop tour of that. Some of the things that we've seen in these, default credentials. So the web interface that we saw on one of those chargers had 3 user accounts. One of them was an administrative account, one of them was a user account, one of them was a super user account. And the super user account you couldn't change credentials for. It was hard-coded and it was in the sort of the installation manual that you needed to go back to the manufacturer to find out what those were if you worked for the manufacturer. Or you could just decompile one of their updates and read it out of the SQLite database. But it was a pretty trivial password. And those are hard-coded into every charger of that type. So I don't know if they've released an update to fix that, but at that point they haven't. It's a bunch of interesting bootloader attacks. So again, we've seen a couple of these that have got little U-boot servers on them, so they'll pull an image from a TFTP server. If you can spin one of those up and give it an image that it likes, and will boot. As I say, a couple of these had web apps built into them. They were pretty chunky web apps with pretty, again, low-level, easy attacks of bit of SQL injection. One of them had some diagnostics, a diagnostic page, and one of the options was a ping, and you could just sort of close out your IP address and had full root command injection on the web interface, get a little callback. Had full root shell. I think that might have been the fastest root shell I've ever seen someone achieve. They're often multi-home, so I think if we go back here, this sort of neighbouring EVSEs, sometimes on corporate networks when these are installed, this might be connected to you might not have the modem or cellular uplink as the main way that you want to be able to collect your charging data. So you might connect the EVSE to your corporate network, but the manufacturer might leave a modem in the top just so they can access the charger, and then you've given yourself them a nice backdoor into your corporate network. Definitely not seen that. Except for it says on the slide we have. There was one quite interesting one. It was there's a manufacturer you can buy part of the EV charger so that you can get an electrician to come and install the bit the electrician needs to install, and then you can buy the actual brain and expensive bit at a later date. So if you were fitting out a car park and you wanted at some point to have 50 chargers, but now you only had the money for 5, you could buy 45 of these sort of installation kits that the installer could program an RFID token on the back of them with Wi-Fi credentials for whatever network you're going to connect them to, and a bunch of personal information about the installer and the owner of the system. And that was all that was needed to get onto the network, obviously with the other EV chargers that were there, and you could sort of do all of the OCPP stuff that we were talking about, and de-auth chargers and all of that cool, fun stuff. And even once you installed the chargers, it was still possible to read the Wi-Fi network out off the bat. So I think quite a lot of this stuff where people have come up with a really cool idea and then just not considered the security implications of it. I suppose where are we going with this? So there are a couple of things that are coming over the hill. Obviously, the government, not just here, but generally governments are very keen to install as many EV chargers as they possibly can everywhere. So I think it's going to become an increasingly interesting thing. Obviously, as people and the public become more reliant on EV chargers and companies become more invested in EV fleets, again, this becomes more of an interesting sort of denial of service for a business not being able to use vehicles that they thought were charged overnight and actually hadn't. Got the car as the only factor of authentication there, so something that Tesla have been doing for a little while, but there is now a proper standard for them, where the car does PKI with the charger, and so that sort of removes some of the ARFID stuff. But again, I've not had to play with any of that stuff yet, but I'm sure someone will be doing a bit of a rubbish job there. Get a vehicle manufacturer to put their Root CA in every vehicle or something like that. So, yeah. So there's a lot of fun to be had. You should go and buy some and have a go, I think.
We've got about 18 minutes before close down speech, so we shall rattle through this. That was my first car. It had no connectivity issues whatsoever, apart from the gearbox linkage that kept falling off, because it was a very effective British Legend vehicle at the time. So, I guess the point for this is, so I'm sort of mid-40s, that was the car I learned to drive in, that's the car I had at university. Things have changed a lot in, 20 years? Maybe I'm a bit older than that, 25 years. But things are moving at a really significant pace. So, this is the car I'm looking at on the car scheme currently. There's nearly a metre of screen. A metre of screen. It's ridiculous. But very cool and very shiny. Sadly, the mortgage rates have changed, so I'll be getting one. But hey. But the amount of tech in here is just absolutely... You can't really describe those two vehicles in the same sense. They have a mechanical engine, and that's about the only thing they have in common with four wheels. So our world is moving really, really quickly. And privacy is becoming a really interesting thing. Did anyone see this? It was about 2017... One of my most amusing stories on the internet where somebody got found out for having an affair because he'd done something logged into his wife's phone with his Uber app or something crazy. And so she was getting pinged alerts even though he'd logged out while he was going to do whatever he was doing. 45 million is a lot of money, but I think the point of this really for me is just privacy is a real thing that a lot of people are focused on really. Now, a lot of things we're carrying around with us have changed the amount of data that we're leaking all of the time. Everywhere we go, they'll think, I carry two phones and an Apple Watch, and the whole world is tracking me. I appreciate that, but now so is our car. So this is a much less funny story, but it really sort of brings to light sort of some of the data points we're talking about. So this is the Crossbow murder that happened in West Wales a little while ago. The key bit I wanted to call out on this really was what the barrister said, the prosecutor, sorry. If it were not for the telematics, not the fact that there was a black box in the Land Rover which recorded all of the information it sent off to Jaguar Land Rover, Mr. Wall would have got away with his lies. Basically, a guy was saying, I wasn't there, I didn't do it, you can't prove anything, I was nowhere near that guy's house with a crossbow, except for the fact that, in interest, I won't go through all of this sort of timeline here, but his vehicle, when he claimed to be absolutely at home, drove to near the house where the guy was killed, and the boot opened for 15 seconds, and then it closed, and then nothing happened for 25, 40 minutes, and they came back again. So the police basically managed to use a whole bunch of telematic information to just completely disprove the story that he was telling. So, but that level of he had no idea that level of detail was being tracked from his vehicle, and this wasn't even a particularly modern vehicle. I'm a Jaguar Land Rover fan; I can't help it. It's just I like old Land Rovers. Even a relatively modest vehicle sending a lot of tracking data.
I think it's worth pointing out as well that I think he burnt the vehicle out at the end, so he wasn't. He thought the car was scrapped and there was no way to be able to get out, but that was all being sent to the cloud, and that was pulled from JLR's cloud.
Yes, this was data that had gone as far as he was up in the sky already. So, potted history. Criminals are taking. So, car theft is a thing. It's been a thing for a long time. Nothing has changed. Anything that is a valuable asset will get nicked in some way. Bear in mind that he's got carjacked in Manchester. Jokes about Manchester insert as applicable. Criminality moves to meet the requirements, basically, of the task at hand, I guess is the short answer here. Numerous press stories about the latest car hacking, repeated thefts of data and source code. This one really interests me. So if you're of an age and you remember back sort of 15, 20 years ago, quite a lot of big software companies had lots of software stacks stolen. A couple of years later, then, quite a lot of interesting attacks appeared, some IR jobs and things. I wonder how they managed to find those bugs. I'm paranoid. I have no idea the basis on other than the fact that there's a bit of a pattern emerging here. There's quite a lot of big OEMs getting done. Clearly, I can't mention any of the names in any of this talk, so you can Google them all afterwards. But anyone seen Fast and Furious 8? One of my favourite films. Overtakers? Yay! The car hacking bit in that is one of the daftest, most extreme comedy things I've seen in a long time. But you would struggle to say that it's absolutely not possible to remotely control a vehicle via its CAN bus over a 4G connection, over data. The fact that there are sort of people with GUIs and things doing it, I suspect is more tricky. But if you've not seen it, it's on YouTube. It's 5 minutes of comedy gold. And we're heading to everything as a service, even vehicles as a service. I think coming over the hill pretty soon. I was chatting to somebody in the office like Thursday, Zap cars and all these sort of things. This is where the world is going, and every time that kind of platform gets rolled out, more monitoring goes with it, more tracking, more data points, more cloud services, more telematics. And as hackers, we should be excited about this. This is fun. This is data everywhere. And I'm a car freak, so it's data in cars. So what more can you want? Relay attacks, it's been done. We'll read all of it through in the interest of time. Keyless entry attacks, yeah, it's been done as well. This one's particularly interesting because it's basically rubbish crypto. You would think in our world, rubbish crypto wouldn't be a thing anymore because crypto, done properly, as in just use the library somebody has written and put on the open source internet for you with some proper keys, and it kind of works. But people still make these mistakes. I think particularly in the automotive engineering space, there's a lot of people without a security background doing engineering. And if you think about where automotive has come from, it's generally been people making cars go quickly around tracks and having fun and by falls, getting muddy, whatever it is. But actually, security's not been really the driving force of a lot of these things. And that's changing. You've probably seen this already, driving from the backseat using a laptop. It's really good fun. I can't name the organisation here because, but you can Google it later. It's completely possible to drive a vehicle over the air. Basically, when you're driving in the driving seat of not my Maestro, but a modern car, you are driving it over the air. You're basically just using data and computing to control powertrains, particularly so in the EV space. This was an interesting one. I will tell you the backstory to it over a beer at some point if anybody's interested. I can't tell you on recording. We know who it was and why, but from TCU in a vehicle right the way through to domain admin, there's a lot of trust going on in these networks. So what we're seeing a lot of is it's an APN, it's trustworthy. Actually, weirdly, the police used to use that argument in the UK about 15 years ago. We can't get inside our APN with a SIM card. Of course you can. It's just stick it in a modem. There's a lot of assumption about layers of security in the space, which are actually really easy to break down, as we'll run on to pretty quickly. So, connected vehicle attack service. Again, that's not my Maestro. This is OED, Bluetooth, USB, radios, keyless, smart, cloud, satellite receiving generally, but the options are available. Pedestrians, mobile Wi-Fi, vehicle to everything communications, where you can see around corners and your car's telling the next car that you can't see that's coming what's happening. That traffic infrastructure stuff as well. And a lot of these bits of tech are now implicit in vehicles that you're buying when you really don't even know that they're there. One of the things that Hugh and I wax lyrical about quite a lot is the way that tech that you'd have seen only probably in a high-end German brand, say, a decade ago, is now completely standard One of our family cars, for example, is a little tiny runaround that has way more tech in it than any of the other cars that I have. Just because that's what the market demands, that's what sells cars, is to put cool, shiny tech in small cars for people that want it. So. And then cameras, photos of everything, sonar, LiDAR. Cameras are really interesting in this context because it's a feature as well as potentially a bug. One of the major manufacturers has got an app for your phone where you can actually look 360 around your car while it's at the pub. So if you want to walk back to your car and you're concerned about where it was parked somewhere sketchy, you can check there's no one around. Quite a good way of stalking people as well if you wanted to use your car as a mobile surveillance station. These things that have privacy impacts both ways really do have an impact. And also, as you were saying about diagnostics, there is one vehicle brand, for example, that we know of that when the head unit crashes, which it does quite a lot, it's crap, it takes a screenshot of all of the screens. And if you happen to be in reverse at the time, so your camera is up, then its diagnostic logs include screenshots from the camera because that's what was on its screens. These are basically not very clever bits of IT that are just being sort of coerced into doing cool things. Right, background to IVIs, I'll rattle through this a little bit than we planned, but basically, you no longer have a CD player in your car. So I used to have a big folder of CDs and you put them in. It was very exciting and it would play music at you. It was great. What you're basically driving around with now is a small board computer and a phone all bolted together with a Wi-Fi access point, voice recognition quite frequently as well. And it does everything. I won't tell you the brand because I get told off, but my dad's car, for example, is really annoying. You can't even work the airflow in it if the head unit crashes. And it's like, oh, it's like a button. But apparently, no, you can't have buttons anymore. Buttons are bad. Why should we target the head unit? Basically, it's connected to everything. And this is one of my bugbears. Sorry if you have to ask me. Because people want on their screen to see if you're driving a hybrid car, the data, the energy flow, when you're slowing down, and you get all the nice arrows saying, yes, you're recovering energy. That's great. That's coming directly from the powertrain cam. These things all need to be connected. Also stores 4G, emails, texts, quite often be paired to them, and often it's connected up to a 4G network. I've been given a 5-minute warning, so I'm going to go through this at some pace. Surely this should be hard. I wish it was. I'd love to say this is really, really difficult. Actually, generally, these things have got Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, UART shells we found hanging out the back of them, a pair of wires, Ethernet connectors, Android debugger, all the things that we would do to generally PhoneKit about a decade ago and laugh at is basically what's in your car now. This is what's quite interesting, plugging in USB devices that suddenly then pop up and become a new method of comms. I've never seen any kind of full disk encryption ever, so you pull the chips off, the jobs are good. There is some sliding in updates. Hidden menus, Google it, it's good fun. Basically, why do we care? You stick it in debug mode, it just pops little firewalls, brings up SSH terminals that were there the day before. Apparently, again, that's the feature. And people on the internet love hacking their cars, so a lot of this stuff about getting green menus up and things, where people want to enable additional features, has been done already, whereas from an IT security point of view, we're much more interested in what that then allows us to do. So, inside of a board, back of a random head unit. If anyone's Googling stuff to go and play later, these things matter. These are called FACRA connectors. These are automotive-style connectors. You can get them on all sorts of random Chinese sites. Generally, one of these will be sort of USB, for example. One of them will be or various sockets you find in your car. They look a bit weird at first sight, but they're not. They're keyed like this, but the ones you can buy from various Chinese locations, just ignore the keying, give you wires, drops a gun, splice it straight into a standard USB lead, off you go. I'm going to go through this really quickly. Data didn't work, playing with Ethernet, why not? No scan results. Oh, we got data now, because it turned out that some funky corporate laptops remove VLAN tagging data for you just to be really helpful. So, a rubbish $5 USB card, and off you go. And then all of a sudden, great, there's an SSH shell, off we go. You'd expect at this point proper difficulty logging in, cracking passwords and things, but no, for this random box I bought on the internet, there was no password. Root and blank was quite successful. How do we get to find some of this stuff out? So we had a surrogate board, took the some of the memory chips off. Sometimes on a dead beetling where you take one off, put it upside down, join the wires back in again. Allowed us to power the board on, so they unlocked the chip with a password, and then we could read the data out. Then all of our favourite debugging tools. The one you probably care about on the left-hand side, root : our favourite thing. There's no stars. So this is us playing with the firmware, knowing then that we can jump straight in. Interesting data on these. So all the photographs that were synced from your various bits of your phone. We've seen people's Facebook photos get synced across and things. We don't really know why it does that. Apparently it's helpful. But these all end up basically on a local unit, on a local disk on a Unix machine. NFS! Woo! The 80s don't want their tech back. But these things still use this because this is back with before inside the secure bubble. Lots of assumptions about it being a trusted space. FTP details, SSH server details for the back-end network of the vendor that built the vehicle for connecting back. Clearly, we don't connect to these in any of the work that we do because that would be very naughty of us. So what we learned, they're basically rubbish Unix machines from a very long time ago, and they're really good fun to play with, and they're cheap on eBay, which is a winning combination. So, modem units, quite interesting. Some of them have modem units off-board, some of them are on-board. The off-board ones tend to be running Android as their OS generally, not universally. Very common chipsets. So there are probably only 2 or 3 chipsets that we see commonly across these. They're really interesting. They've got a key role in the power management of a vehicle. So if you think about Maestro, you turn the key off, everything stops, you go home, jobs are good. And not anymore. You get in your car, you press the start button, things beep and wake up. You've got cars with touchless key locks. For example, you'll find that the head unit starts powering up once you get to the car to try and get ahead of you. So, and real-world privacy. Basically, vehicles store a lot of information. A lot of information gets synced back to the OEMs. They can access them remotely for debugging, which is quite an interesting one, over 4G networks. Wired Apple CarPlay seems to be the one that has the least impact from a privacy point of view in terms of data being synced, but that changes clearly as software updates come along. Android Auto is better than direct Bluetooth, but it's sort of somewhere in between. This is a really interesting one, though. Some manufacturers had a play in a big German vehicle, someone had as a test car recently, for a company car scheme. And the first thing it did was flash up privacy warnings, like set these settings. Are you a guest driver? What role are you having? So clearly there's a thought process in the OEMs where they're starting to take notice that this sells cars now and has an impact. So it'd be really interesting to see where this goes over the next few years. But fundamentally, they are still 10-year-old Unix systems in many cases running personal data. So I think I've probably just about made it before I get kicked out. But any questions? Other than that was way too fast.
Is there a way of opting out these, like what GDPR happens, go on a website, is there a way to opt out things that happen?
No, generally not. What they often give you is a box that says accept. Not usually a box that says don't accept. So, yeah, sadly not at the moment, but I think we will see that change over the next couple of years. So I've just been told that our time is up. If anybody has any questions afterwards, not now, clearly, but call me somewhere and we'll have a chat. That's absolutely fine. Otherwise, thank you for listening, and yeah.